Okay, so now we're on to our next example. You can see our next example item that we're going to scan is going to be a transmission. And cool enough for you, this is actually a Noble transmission. It's spare, it's identical to the transmission that's in NUS 027. It's a Noble M12, um, as you would know. But this is going to be our next scan. We're going to create our new project, and you've seen in the last video how to use this, but just for a refresher, we're going to go ahead and set our name, and this is going to be Noble Transmission, if I can spell it, transmission. Okay, so this is our project, and our scanner is still warmed up from the last time that we used it, so it's ready to go. Now we have a warning. This is a limited disk space available, and it's saying our hard drive is nearly full, which may impact new data. If you have several scans and you have a lot on your computer, that's something to note. Currently, we only have a couple scans that we've done, and I'm sure that we're good to go with this scan, so we're not going to look into that any further at the moment. Feature scan is what we're going to do with this. Before we do scans, we didn't go over this on the last project, the head, because it came out of the box and it's clean. But something that we're going to discuss now is that anytime you go to do a scan, the object needs to be clean of grease, especially if you're going to spray. Scanning sprays are not going to stick to grease, and it's best to get the part as deloused as you possibly can before starting this process. For this instance, our transmission case here was going to be sandblasted, so doing it after it was washed and sandblasted gave us the best opportunity to get the results we desire. So we're on a feature scan, and our scanner is currently connected. So we're going to go to full field mode. Full field mode is the fastest way to scan. It's going to give you the widest range, and with the parallel and cross lines, you move slower to get the results. Versus full field is fast, especially with feature scanning, but the object types are only general and black. And this is good for a lot of things, but we'll discuss the different reasons you may want to use one of these other features later. As you can see in feature scan mode, the only two options we have here are full field and auto turntable. The auto turntable can be used both outside and inside of the auto turntable feature out of that scan setting, but we'll discuss those features later. Currently, we're going to do another full field scan, and we're going to do general because this is not a black object. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up my scanner, and you can see already that I'm getting a depth camera underexposed warning. This is going to be something that it'll tell you if it gets bad enough. That does not mean that if there's no warning that the coast is clear per se. We are definitely shooting for the best result we can get. So in the depth camera to our left, we can see that once again, this is not the view that I'm wanting to see based on the way that I'm standing and viewing this object. So I'm going to turn it. Now you can see that this line is the order that I want to see it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to adjust the exposure. I'm going to press the plus button on the Getrag scanner, and you can see there's a little bit of blue. I'm going to go up, and now I see a little bit of blue in certain spots and a little bit of red. Typically this is going to be about the range that you're going to get, especially with most things. If you have something that has a lot of different depths, you'll notice as I move in and out that you see different things, but the exposure changes based on not only the depth of the area that I'm viewing, but it changes based on the angle at which I come at it, which obviously as I go around an object, I'm going to be going at different angles. So it's just something to note, to pay attention to the colors on the left. Currently, I've got in the excellent range is the majority of the green lines, as you can see on the right hand side, and it'll tell you the millimeters in the little bars on the right as well. So I'm going to get a little bit of a pass before I press the start button to get a feel for the distance. This is a distance that is working for it. I like being a little further back because it allows me to get as much in the camera as I can. I'm going to go up and around, and I've kind of got a feel for how I want to go about this already, but typically I just enjoy doing this so I can get a feel for the pattern and movement process that I want. So now my depth exposure is set. I have a decent feel for the distance, and I'll just continue to pay attention to that as I go. I'm going to go ahead and start in a moment, and we're going to do a part of the scan, and then we'll pause and we'll resume the scan. That's different than merging, but this will give us the opportunity to get a couple different angles whilst I'm not uncomfortable reaching around in weird spots. So I'm going to pick a notable feature of the transmission to start. I like doing this because it gives me an area I can come back to if I get lost or if the scanner gets lost. Maybe I need to take a break in the middle of the scan because it's an awkward position. So I like this spot here for now. You can tell I'm a little close. I'm going to back up and I'm going to press the start button. In full field mode, you can see that it turns green very quickly. It will not do this in other modes because they're slower, but they do have very high resolution. You can see that it's catching quite a lot of even in those depths, but I'm not worrying about that too much right now. I'm making my first pass to get the angle that I want, and I'm watching the scanner on the screen of the laptop more than what I'm viewing in reality, because it doesn't matter what I think the scanner sees, it matters what the scanner actually recognizes. This will help you not get halfway through a scan and then realize that the tracking got lost about 30 minutes ago. So you can see it's catching quite a lot of this, and it's not getting confused because this is a clean part, it's a sandblasted part, there's a lot of definition and a lot of different features on this project. Different things I'll discuss as I'm going through this. For example, the full field mode is great for feature-rich objects. I enjoy using it on objects like this, maybe that have depth to them. As you can see right here is a perfect example. It can see all the way into these finned areas, but it doesn't get a lot of texture. As you can see, it's a sandblasted part, so to our eyes there's not a ton of texture, but as far as point clouds go, that's a lot of difference between the ups and the downs of the project. So maybe cross lines or parallel lines would give you that texture that you desire. Here is going to be an example of a red area. You can see the note that I was discussing earlier. It says tracking lost, move to a previously scanned area. You can do this one of two ways. You can move back, like I'm going to move back to this area, and it thinks it recognized it. I'm going to give it a second, and now it actually snapped to where I want it to be. If this doesn't work, let's say I'm all the way over here, it got lost and I didn't realize it, or for example, this is not right. It snapped back to it, but there's some issues here. That's not quite lined up right. Now is the time to address this. I can use the undo arrow, and you can see it's getting rid of some dots here, and you can tell how far off it got. It doesn't necessarily always recognize when it's off, so it's ideal to pay attention to this. You want to go as far back as you can without getting any of the objects that are correct taken away. So the one way to get the feature to be recognized again is to either continue playing it and move the device, or a great way to do it, especially on certain objects, is let's say this is an area that has fully been viewed by the scanner, and it's my starting point, roughly, because I was close in this area. I'm going to press play, and within just probably about 3 seconds, it's going to recognize exactly where I am, and there's going to be no issues. Now I'm going to start, and you'll get a feel for what it can and can't keep track of as you go. Different times that maybe you should pause, maybe different times that you should use different techniques, but you can see it's getting a lot of this in here, and it knows exactly where it's at. Sometimes I can get a little closer than is ideal, so that that the light of the full field mode will get into those valleys. But one thing I want to make an example of in just a moment is the way that you scan can have a great impact. The different movements can have a great impact on the result of your scan. So I'm going to take the opportunity now because it lost its tracking anyway. So if I'm scanning like this, and I'm not going to play, I'm just going to move the scanner. I'm going to come across, and let's say I do this, and now I'm fully focused on the laptop screen. I completely am not thinking about my hand, I'm just watching what it's doing. I'll tend to do this. This is personally something I tend to do. I tend to tilt and pan off of one position and just tilt. And that may be good for areas like this, but it's not good for, if I want to get the whole inside, it's not best to start here and make an aggressive pan. Press the start button, and I'll give it just a second to recognize where I'm at. So now it's got the location. I'm going to move a little bit as I rotate. I'm going to keep an eye on it because it looks like it might be confused, but that's hard for me to tell at the moment because I'm watching the screen. Yeah, so I can see, I paused the scan. I can see that it didn't quite get it right. You can see 2 circles here. So I'm going to go back, and I'll typically do a couple clicks because there's going to be a lot of data in each click, but I don't want it to go so far that I affect and have to go forwards again. So just going to continue. I can start to see the lines where it's supposed to be, and this is about where we can resume. So we can see what I did was I started in an area that it had reason to believe may be this area, or at least close enough. So I try to start in the most areas that have the most distinctive area, but sometimes it might not recognize it regardless. So maybe for this time, it's seen a little bit of all of these. So I'm going to start, I'm going to get in the good range, and I'm going to start in the center. See, this time it snapped right into where I wanted it to be. And now I can make the movement over to the side, up around the edges, and just keeping a little bit of that notable area of these in the view will help. I got a little off there, so I'm going to go back just a couple clicks. And this is where it can get time consuming to get a perfect scan. If you are okay with a decent scan, you can go back in post-processing. For now, we could go and we could get all of these little details in here, but for now we're going to take this opportunity to show how to just continue a scan, how to resume a scan to get a different area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scanner down, and I'm going to pick up the bell housing, the transmission, and I started about here. So if I turn it enough to where I can see this area as my starting point, then I can get in here. And this area is dark, so I may need more light when I get to it, or I may need to turn up my exposure. But I'm going to take the laptop software, and typically what I like to do just for my visualization's sake is I like to set the view of the screen to the same view that I'm going to be starting on. I'm going to go ahead and start over here. I have a good feeling that it'll recognize this. Yep, so it snapped right onto it. I like pre-setting up what the display shows, because if there's an object that I may get confused on, I know that I'm in the same area. Sometimes it won't recognize you've moved areas, and it will start scanning. It'll look right, but it'll be in a completely different side of the scan. Like if I was working on a radiator hose, there's two ends of the radiator hose. I may not recognize it's on the wrong end. To get that center, I'm just going to start. I pause for just a moment to get a little bit of a better angle for myself. I'm going to press start. And sometimes once you get 2,500 frames or so, it may take a second. And so you can see it said start scanning and then pause scanning because I pressed the button. Sometimes it's best just to give it a moment to get comfortable. You can see there's some blue in those deep areas. I could turn up the exposure and you'll see that it goes away. And I can turn down the exposure. So let's say I want to get both the deep spots and the edges on the same pass. I can move slowly and turn up and down the exposure to get the deep areas and then to get the shelves that would be overexposed should I not resume those. So now I'm going to go ahead and keep making my way around. I'm going to move my feet to get a more comfortable position, because if you're uncomfortable, you'll tend to make movements that aren't quite as smooth and maybe that aren't as productive to your scanning process. I'm going to make a quick pass over these from a slightly different angle. It's best to tend to go back to get those other angles once you've gotten a majority of a pass. That way it has more data to recognize and it'll think, okay, they're going back for more detail, as opposed to thinking, I don't know where we're at anymore. So I'll continue making way, and I'm going to come around to this side of the transmission. Before I make the movement of the transmission again, even though this is a slightly uncomfortable position, so I'm going to get as much data as I can. I'm going to pause it. That way I can start at a notable feature. I got a little bit of this so that I can try to get that as a starting point that it'll recognize. So I can see I've already gotten both of these and that opening. So if I try to start here and it doesn't recognize it, I can move over a little bit and maybe get it to start. But this is going to be my starting point. It snapped right in. I'm going to come down, and the thinner an object, let's say I'm working on a windshield, the more likely you are to lose track. So we'll discuss later some things for doing that. Typically, if you're doing a very thin object and you're trying to get both sides, unless you want to merge, then you'll have to do marker tracking so that it recognizes that you're on different sides. And I say that because there's spots of the front of this bell housing where it would connect to the engine that are kind of thin. And if I was to go over here, I got to back up a bit. I'm going to pause it so that I can get in the range that I should be. You can see it doesn't know where it's at. I can go to an area it does, and as I come around, now you can see the green area that is light green. That's all that it's recognizing. So that's why when you have thin objects, it has a hard time making the switch from side to side. As I go around, I got a better angle on some of these areas. So I'm going to go around it. And you can see right now it's orange. It says I'm far. But it also says I'm too near, which that's caused by the major depth changes in the item I'm scanning. So I'm just going to go for the best result that I can get and be willing to come back and make some changes. So you can see we've got a good amount of the transmission now. I'm going to go ahead and let's see what our scan looks like now that we've made a couple passes. You'll see there's a little bit of deformation here. That's not quite right. I'm not too worried about that. There's a couple things we can do to manage that. But overall, that's a really good scan. I could spend a lot more time to get it perfect. You can see areas like this are looking really good. But let's say I needed this scan to drop it in the car for space measurements to make sure I'm not going to hit anything. If I'm doing a transmission swap, then I want the shape. Maybe I'm doing a starter swap and I want this area. So you can really make that decision before you scan or while you're scanning to say, maybe this area isn't important, I'm not worried about it, or maybe you are, and you can make those decisions as you go. For now, I've done all the different points that I want. I'm going to press complete. You can see here we have 4452 frames, 4,452 frames. This scanner is capable of scanning up to 30,000, but as you get more frames, you'll tend to see the software. It takes a little longer for different things, or maybe when you press start on the scanner, it takes a second or it doesn't want to start. And that's something to consider, is that being patient with the software as you get more frames is better, because you don't want to crash the software and lose any progress. It's typically just best to work with it at its pace, and especially this is a computer that's capable of handling the high stress. So the software can only do so much. You can see I missed an area here. I could continue scanning, but for now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the fusion. Since this is a large object and I'm not going for total perfection, I'm still going to go like 0.8 millimeters is a point distance that's still much smaller than 2 millimeters, but I'm going to go for about 0.6 or so. That way I can get good detail without having a major processing time. While this is processing, we're going to talk about something that's up here that you'll rarely see people use when they're making tutorials or videos. This is one-click edit, and people tend not to use this not when making tutorials, not so that they can look cool by showing you all the different features, but just because in certain software versions it's not a very helpful tool per se. Because like I explained earlier with isolation, if I have things that are far apart and I do the one-click edit, it may not recognize that just because it's isolated doesn't mean it's bad. It may get rid of those things, or maybe it'll smooth it much further than I want. I've done this in the past with the one-click edit. I've had some really good results sometimes, but other times, a majority of the time I'd say, I just wasn't quite happy, because it obviously can't know exactly what you're going for and what features that you care for. So that's the reason you don't typically see people use the one-click edit. As it's continuing to fuse, just put the reminder there that our instructions are always on the right-hand side of the screen for most of our things. But we'll take a moment and I'll show you some of the tools that are on the right-hand side. I'm not going to show them in actuality, but I'll just say kind of what they are, some of my favorites per se. We have on the top right-hand side, we have the click. That's obviously what we're going to be using for most of our things. But sometimes if let's say you're making an edit, let's say I did a rectangle like I did earlier, and I select a certain area, I drag it, and I make a click, and I delete something, then I'm trying to move my object and I don't know what's going on. I've done this a couple times. You can come back to your mouse and you can click and do drags to drag it where you want. There's a couple different tools here. One of these tools down here in this area, you can see it looks like a straight line through the center of a square with a shaded side on one and a blank, like a gray transparent side on the other. That'll make a line. I can make a line straight across this item, because let's say I'm on a turntable and this is the transmission up here. I'm dragging my mouse around to just give an example, and my turntable is down here because my transmission was sitting on it, and I had a holder, I had it sitting on something. I don't need any of the turntable data. I can just make one line in one fell swoop. I can delete it. If it goes the opposite direction, you can use a tool just below that, which flips it to delete everything to the other side. So obviously you can play with these a little bit and get to know some of your favorites. I like using the straight line tool. I'm not sure exactly what its name is, but I like using that in most instances for deleting large sections of items. And then maybe I'll use like the lasso tool or something to get a more fine-tuned um, result around if I have maybe a base that I didn't remove or something like that. There will be an option that we can show later. It will be, I think, while you're scanning it shows, but there's an option within the software that allows you to remove the base while you scan. This would be like if I'm scanning on the black thing here that we have set out, it's going to pick all of this up and you'll have some great resolution for your table, but that's not necessarily what you're trying to achieve. So you can get it to automatically remove that as it's scanning. We can see here, we'll give it a second to save the edits, but this is a fused result. You can see there's some pretty good definition and detail there. I can almost read on the head of the bolt. Of course, I can't zoom in too far because it's not meshed, but you can tell in certain instances when you get a really good scan and you spend the time to fuse it and everything, you can actually see the grade of the bolt in the scan. So now you can see, maybe I'm trying to see over here, but I'm having an issue. I'm trying to drag, so I can use shift, I'll hold it down, and now I can drag over. Holding down, click on my mouse and drag with my mouse. So that way I can move that way. There's maybe some other ways I want to move or other features. I can right click within this space as long as it's not processing or doing something else, and I can zoom to fit. I can go to default, show grid, mesh model, and all these different things. Keyframe edit is also one of the things that you can do that allows you to go through each individual frame and delete it. That is a more fine-tuned process for getting, it may take a little longer, so we won't show you that now. Tends to that you can pause the scan during it to remove those features that are out of place then. But you can see here, now that I've moved over, I'm gonna hold shift, click, and move my mouse. You can actually see, if we would have spent the time to get all here, you can see it says 3S7R dash. So you can actually get casting numbers and all kinds of information off of these scans, which is really cool. It just shows you the quality. You can see texture here. So it's fun to look over because there's been times that I've gone over a scan and said, I think that's faulty. I don't think that's supposed to be there. And I looked at the part and I had just never noticed that level of detail on that part. So that's our just a little bit of a discussion while we had that fusing and looking at our result. Here's isolation. I didn't show this earlier, but this may be a good example of a time that you can do isolation. This is 15%. 15% is isolation rate refers to, this is the isolation rate refers to the percentage of an isolated point cloud outside the main point cloud to the total number of points, which is in the instructions here. But if I go smaller, that's a smaller percentage from the total number of points. Typically 15% is where I start if I'm going to use it. I press detect, and it just takes a couple seconds to see anything. You'll tend to have a lot of isolation, and this is what I was talking about. These bolts, I don't want to get rid of these bolts, so I tend not to do this unless I just have the time or the need to play around with isolation to get the right isolation rate. But a good instance of when you could use this would be if you have a part with a bunch of dots or things in the background that got captured, you can use that then. We're going to go ahead, we're going to overlap this. Typically, it'll either open here to what you previously used, or it'll give you your recommended. If you're not sure if this is what you've previously used, you can press reset, and it'll give you the value that it recommends. We're going to go with its recommended value for now. An instance of when you don't want to use the recommended value is either when you know better and you have a better feel, or if you plan to merge objects, you want to use the same post-processing feature for each individual item to give it the best chance. Here, we're going to go ahead, now that I'm happy with the look, and I've gotten rid of some of the areas that aren't as satisfactory. It's currently recommending a grid size of 2.93 millimeters, and I'm going to give this a try. If I'm not happy, I can overwrite it by just changing the grid size, and then it'll just automatically overwrite. So you can see here exactly what I was hoping to happen. I did my mesh, I had a beautiful object, but then my mesh, it looks terrible. It's because the grid size is not ideal. So the larger the grid size, this is what you're going to get looks-wise. You can see it's just kind of like, I don't even know how you describe it, but it's just not appealing. Yes, pixelated. It's typically, you don't want this result for anything that you use, at least in my experience. But you have to find the level between taking 10 minutes, if you have a large scan to post-process, and getting something of bad result. So typically, in the type of features I use, I like the about 0.6 millimeter range, just because it gives me some detail and to where I can see everything still. But it's not 0.02, because there's nothing on here that I'm trying to achieve metrology level results from. I'm not trying to measure the amount of liquid or capacity of anything where I would need to know every high and low. So this says estimated 2 minutes. Typically, especially with a powerful computer, you're going to achieve faster times than that. But it does give you a good idea to where on previous versions and previous scans, we had a different laptop we used, and we would do a large scan. Our previous scanner could do up to 3,000 frames, and it would say 30 minutes. Well, if it says 30 minutes, I'm not going to stand here and wait. I'm going to move on to something else so that I'm not spending that time. But you can see 0.68 was right on the money as far as where I'd like to be in this scan. You can see there's some real good definition. You can see the bolts, for example. I can see the flats on the bolts. If I were to go and find an area that had like writing, you can see that if I went, that I can still see the part number, and I could go even smaller to get even more definition on these parts. But this is a pretty good looking scan. You can see the wrinkles in the tape, and this is typically what I like to see. So for that, we'll conclude the transmission scan, and we'll move on to our next scan here momentarily.